Today, in our Old Testament reading, we have the continuation of God's chosen first family. We're moving now from Jacob, who is now Israel, into his offspring. And we are focusing specifically on Joseph, who is beginning to have a bad time, as it were. Through a strange series of events, most of which aren't Joseph's fault, mind you, his brothers hate him and want to kill him. And I say most of it is not his fault because he never asked to be labeled the favored child. He never asked for the special Technicolor Dream Coat or anything like that. The only thing that he did that probably irritated them was he kind of snitched on them. So it's understandable why they were a little bit upset with him. But not everything was Joseph's fault. And that's kind of sad. He had no control. He didn't ask to be the favorite. He didn't ask anything. He didn't ask to have the power of dreams and all of these things. Now, he could have not told them his dream. And the dream that he told them was that they would bow down to him. And so in his brothers' hearts, here's essentially what winds up happening. They can see Joseph being the favorite. They see him getting special treatment. He's a snitch. He's gotten them in trouble. And now he's saying that he is going to be bowed down to by them. And logically, if we're thinking things through here, that's not how this is supposed to work, right? Joseph may be the favorite, but he is the youngest. He gets the least of the pie, as it were. And yet, here it is. Essentially, him having a dream saying he is going to be exalted over his brothers. And let's not even talk about the coat. We call it the Amazing Technicolor Dream Coat because of Donny Osmond and things like that, but the way that it's described in here is it had really long sleeves. And what's interesting is the amount of colors on it would have been fascinating because it's expensive to dye things, especially in this time. The fact of the matter is, whatever the robe, the coat, whatever it was, looked like, it was an expensive gift. And so now, what we have is the favored son has a new coat. He also has this attitude where he thinks that we're going to bow down to him. Which we don't really read that he was arrogant or haughty or all of these different things. What we read was that, he just told them this dream. And so his dad sends Joseph to see what his brothers are doing. And when he gets there, and they see him off in the distance, they want to kill him. I have one sister. I have never wanted murder. I've wanted to, get her in trouble, for sure. I've maybe wanted to fight with her, but to have that hatred in your heart that you're I'm going to kill this person, that's really weird to me. It's very strange to me. I don't have a frame of reference for that. And then Reuben tries to stop the madness. I just throw him in a pit. It's fine. Because in his mind, he can come back later and fish Joseph out of the well, right? And then what happens is, if Reuben's smart about this, well, he just saved the golden child, which means now he has more favor than his brothers. It's a very smart political move on Reuben's part. And I think that politics plays a bit into it because what we read later is he doesn't try to stop them from what's next. What happens next is these Ishmaelites show up. And it's interesting that they're called the Ishmaelites because it really ties it into the story of Abraham. Ishmael was the unfavored son of Abraham, the one who got sent away with his mother Hagar in favor of Isaac, who begat Jacob, who became Israel, who begat Joseph. Everything ties together in a nice, neat little package. But as they see them, they say, well, wait a minute. Let's kill, metaphorically, two birds with one stone. We'll get rid of Joseph, and we'll make a little money. So they decide to sell him into slavery. Because what good is a dead brother? So this is what they do. They sell him into slavery. Reuben doesn't really object at this point, and I have to wonder why he doesn't, because he seemed very keen on saving him, unless he thought that, well, maybe this is enough. He's just out of our hair. He won't be dead. He probably won't be having a good time wherever he winds up, but he won't be dead. For Joseph, for the tribe of Israel, for the people of Israel, what happens here in this moment sets up one of the most historic events still to this day for the Israelite people. It will come to define them and help them form a more cultural identity. This is how they got to Egypt. Not just Joseph. This is how the people, the Israelites, got to Egypt. Because what happens next in this story is Joseph continues to have his terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. He goes and he gets sold to Potiphar. And he's doing his thing, and then Mrs. Potiphar's wife, because she doesn't get a name, tries to hit on him. Then he gets blamed for that, thrown in jail. While he's in jail, he meets a guy who's having dreams. He explains those dreams to him, and he says, God gave me the ability to understand dreams. So when that guy gets out and goes back to the king, when the king's having weird dreams, that guy says, wait, I know a guy. They get Joseph out, he explains the dreams, sets them up to protect themselves throughout the famine that is about to come, and they welcome with open arms the Israelite people. That's how they get there. And even then, the story doesn't have the happy ending, because the next line that we read in Exodus, when we get there, it says what? There came a Pharaoh who forgot about Joseph. And the cycle of bad things happening again starts all over again. It's a circle. It's an up and down, wavy circle of good things happen, bad things happen, good things happen, bad things happen. And we have to ask ourselves, why? What's the point of all of this? If God wanted the people to be in Egypt, he could have just had the people be in Egypt. He could have told them, hey, go conquer Egypt, I will go with you. We saw that in the Canaanite story, right? When they were able to go and take the land. We have these conquest narratives where God was with them. So if God wanted them in Egypt, why not just do that? Why have to go through terrorizing a 17-year-old child who didn't do anything wrong? Why did he have to be betrayed to teach a lesson? And most of us, we've probably been betrayed before. We've been betrayed by family and friends and stuff, and it's not good. But this right here, this especially hurts because it doesn't seem to make sense. And the reason it doesn't make sense is because this is God's chosen family. And if that's the case, then where is God in the midst of all of that? Theodicy is the vindication of divine goodness and providence and the view of the existence of evil. That is a really fancy way of saying, why do bad things happen to good people? It's one of the questions that keeps us up at night. Why is it that people who are ostensibly, good, who do what God wants them to do, why are they being punished? And this story is a prime example. What did Joseph do wrong? Oh, he tattled on his brothers. Every kid does that. Is that enough to get him sent to Egypt to become a slave? No, of course not. And it starts to rattle in our brains. Why does God permit evil things to happen in the first place? Is this not a good God that we worship? Why would God allow these things to happen? Why do people suffer? And there's no clear answer. For sure, you can read a bunch of books about theories and stuff like that, but at the end of the day, most of them will wind up telling you the same thing. Evil exists in the world, and that causes suffering. That's the bottom line. There's no Hallmark greeting card that's going to make you feel better about it. It's just that bad things happen. The only solace and hope that we take in the midst of all of the evil that we face is God. God rules, still, to this day. In spite of what Joseph is going through, and he will even later come to say, hey, the thing that you wanted to be evil, that was a good thing that wound up happening. Because look, I saved a bunch of people because I told them to stock up food during the famine. I saved you guys. I saved our people. I did these things because God helped me do them. So the thing that you thought was like going to wind up hurting me actually wound up helping a bunch of people. Some people will call this optimism, Pollyanna syndrome, watching the world through rose-colored glasses. I call it just being completely honest. Something bad happened to Joseph, something mostly out of his control. And instead of being down in the dumps about it, he does what he has to do in the midst of it. In the midst of this chaos, in the midst of this change. Paul talks about this later being like this peace that passes all understanding, that in the midst of the world crumbling down around you, the one sure thing that you have is this really weird kind of easygoing peace, because ultimately you know that Christ is triumphant sitting on the throne. When something chaotic happens, the world gets shifted. I don't know a lot about science and stuff, but what I do know is our world, our earth, has a very specific axis tilt that it has. And if that axis were to change, even like a little bit, it's going to have dire consequences for the planet. Climates will shift and things like that. And it's not going to be a good thing. So when we use phrases like, well, the axis has shifted, things get tilted on its axis, that's why. Because it's not a good thing that would happen. That is what chaos does in our lives in general. It takes the world and it turns it on its head. What we do then is we have to reorient ourselves on the one true axis of the world, which is Jesus Christ. It's what happens in the gospel reading this morning. Jesus is, of course, doing his thing. He preached to the people, he healed the people, he dismissed them, he did the whole, pastoral thing, like, have a nice week, have a blessed week, shaking hands, kissing babies, all that fun stuff. And he goes away. He does this introvert thing where he goes up on the mountain and he sits in solitude with God. And he sort of sits there and recalibrates himself. He sends the disciples out, he sends the people out, and he's just like, I need 20 minutes of God time. Which is a really great reminder for us that when we do things for God, we do also need to stop and recalibrate and make sure that we're, in sync with God, as it were. But while this is going on, the disciples are on a boat, because of course they are. And then a little storm comes. They get battered around by waves and knocked around by waves, and they get stuck. They don't have engines, they don't have rowers or things like that. And so the disciples are now stuck in a boat out to sea. They can't get back because the wind isn't with them, the waves aren't with them. This is a question of what are they going to do? There's not a whole lot they can do until the wind gets on their side. I've been stuck on a boat one time. And it wasn't even that bad. It was in 8th grade. We went to Put-in-Bay. And for some reason, we just did donuts in Lake Erie because we couldn't dock. I don't know. We were told maybe something about a geese and an engine. I don't know. But what I know is we sat for about an hour just doing donuts in Lake Erie. And, it was fun. There's waves and stuff and we goofing off with friends. But at the same time, it's I'm over this. I would very much like to be off of this boat now. I can't imagine what the disciples were going through because I had a nice cabin with lights and stuff. They're just getting tossed about by the waves. They're completely out of control and out of their element. And then Jesus walks up to them, which is really weird. That Jesus walks up to them because, again, they're in the middle of the sea. I don't even know. I don't know if they can quite see land or not. But what we do know is that off in the distance, they see a guy walking towards them. And I have to imagine that the thought that they have was, that's weird. They didn't have like a super lot of science back in Christ's time, but what they did know was that things that are heavy sink in water. A full-grown man is not supposed to walk on water. Not only that, it's still wavy. I've been to one of my favorite places to be, weirdly enough, Noah's Ark at Kennywood. I love that fun house. I remember taking the kids through there and just telling them, "Oh, it's Noah's Ark, you'll have fun." No. It's a fun house. And sometimes in a fun house, you get on land that's, rocky and things like that. And that's still solid. Like, it's still a piece of wood, but it's like wibbly and wobbly and all that stuff. So imagine trying to walk on water when waves are coming. Like, these are things that aren't supposed to happen. And so they freak out, because of course they do. And Jesus is like, "Guys, calm down. It's me. Calm down." Peter says, all right, yeah, Lord, if it's you, cool, wonderful. Tell me to come to you. Because of course he needs proof. After all, the world around him right now is very strange. It's very chaotic. There's a lot going on. Sensory overload for Peter. He's been rocked in a boat all night long. And now he sees a guy walking on water, and that's not normal. And so he just needs to see and identify and understand that at least one thing is kind of normal, and that it's not some evil spirit or demon or whatever, that it really is just Jesus. And so Jesus says, "Okay, come on." Peter at this point now has to put his money where his mouth is, climbs out the boat, and begins walking on water. And he's doing fine. I have to imagine, maybe it's like when you see like a baby giraffe start walking and they're kind of like unsteady at first, and they get the walking thing going on, and I can't imagine what that would be like, except for the fact that I can imagine what happens next, because when he looks at the wave and he has this moment where he's like, "Oh wait, I'm on water. I know how this works." And it is then we get this almost Wile E. Coyote-esque scene that happens. Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner, they were some of my favorite Looney Tunes outside of Foghorn Leghorn. I don't know why, but Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner, they always did this thing, right, where he'd run across a ledge and he'd be fine. He would stand there and he would look back at the Roadrunner, and then he would look down and say, "Oh, this is not possible." And that's when the laws of gravity kick back in and he falls. The minute that Peter realizes he's doing something that's not scientifically possible, when he takes his eyes off of Jesus and he worries about what's going on around him, that is the moment that he begins to sink. That is why Jesus grabs him and says, "Why did you have such little faith? Why did you doubt?" Because if he just would have kept his eyes on Christ and doing what God wanted him to do, he would have been fine. Heck, they probably could have convinced the other disciples and play a game of basketball or something on the sea. I don't know. But the minute that he stops looking at Christ, the minute that he takes his eyes off of that axis, that center, that focal point that tells you that everything is going to be okay, that's when the panic sets in, and that's when the doubt and the fear creep in. And that's what happens. He begins to sink. If we think about it, we do impossible things every day. Scientifically speaking, you're a lump of gray matter piloting a suit of bone and muscle. Because the things that kind of make you who you are, they all come from the brain, right? I'm not this body. I'm more. I'm spirit and thought and things like that. And most of that is associated with the brain. Like, that's weird. Like, that's strange. Yet we live. We're able to breathe in something that's poisonous to people, oxygen. Like, not people, but like other things. Like, they can't breathe oxygen. Like, we breathe in that oxygen and we exhale a deadly gas. If aliens ever did come to the earth, they would be terrified of us. You mean they lost an arm and they just, cut it off? and put like another arm on there. They're spewing out this poisonous gas from their face. These are things that should be impossible, but they're possible. Our lives function the same way. Everybody here in this room has had the worst day of their life. And I always sarcastically say, worst day of your life so far. Which is meant to be hopeful. And the reason it's meant to be hopeful is because every time you have said, this is the worst day of my life, what has happened? You're on the other side of it. Every day that you have ever considered to be the worst day of your life, you got through. You didn't do it on your own. You did it because God is there with you. The problem, though, is it's easy. It's easy to notice the waves. It's easy to think about being stuck in a well and being sold into slavery. It's easy to focus on the things that happen to us. And don't get me wrong, we should acknowledge them because those things are the things that make us who we are. Every scar I have on my body, I like to have because it is a reminder of what I have been through. You can't build a tent and live there. At the end of the day, what we have is the sure and sudden hope in Jesus Christ. That though things are chaotic, though things are crazy and strange, our patient endurance to get us through the trials, the tribulations, the pitfalls, the chaos, the one thing that is focused on and the center of our universe is Jesus Christ. We just need to be reminded of it sometimes. Because it's easy. Your mind will play tricks on you. And that's fine. That's human nature. That's what happens. But I implore you all, when you feel that start slipping, stop and check where your gaze is. Christ is the only thing that can fix the crazy chaoticness of this world. You won't find it in a book, in a store, in food, money, whatever. It is through Christ and Christ alone that our solid feet are firmly planted. Amen.